June 18, 1944, near Carentan, Normandy. Dawn breaks low and grey over the Norman countryside. The air smells of wet earth, cordite, and burning fuel. Somewhere to the west, naval guns still mutter like distant thunder, their echoes rolling inland across fields torn open by shell fire. Beside a shattered railway embankment, Captain Robert Ellsworth, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, kneels in the mud with a pair of field glasses pressed to his eyes. What he sees makes his jaw tighten. The tracks ahead, twisted steel rails, splintered sleepers, a crater where a bridge once stood, are not damaged. They are annihilated. A German demolition team did its work thoroughly before retreating. Charges placed with care, cuts made at precise intervals, switches wrecked, signals torn out. Even the ballast has been shoveled away in places, leaving rails sagging uselessly in the air. Ellsworth lowers the glasses and looks back down the line. Behind him, stretching all the way to the beaches, is an army that eats, burns, and bleeds at an industrial scale. And right now, it is running on trucks. You can hear the invasion before you see it. Engines grinding under too much weight. Gearboxes screaming as convoys crawl through narrow Norman lanes. The endless cough of dust, the hiss of overheated radiators, the clatter of ammunition crates stacked higher than regulations ever allowed. The Allies have landed in France, but landing is the easy part. Supplying the force is something else entirely. By mid-June, more than 1 million men are ashore. Tanks, artillery, fuel by the ton, food by the trainload. Every mile inland stretches the supply chain thinner, and every destroyed road and bridge tightens the choke. Ellsworth knows the numbers, because they've been drilled into him for months. A single armored division burns thousands of gallons of fuel a day. A corps fires thousands of artillery rounds an hour in sustained combat. Trucks can do the job, but not forever. They break down. They clog roads. They consume fuel just to deliver fuel. Railroads are different. Railroads are salvation. Ellsworth stands and brushes mud from his knees as a jeep pulls up behind him. Lieutenant James Porter, his executive officer, jumps out, helmet askew, clipboard already in hand. "Sir," Porter says, breathless, "Third Army Logistics says they're feeling it already. Ammunition allocations cut. Fuel priorities shifting." Ellsworth nods grimly. "Because the rails are dead." Porter glances at the wrecked line. "How long to fix?" Ellsworth doesn't answer right away. He walks to the edge of the crater where the bridge once stood. German charges have blown the central span into the stream below. Twisted girders jut up like broken ribs. The water runs brown and fast, carrying pieces of France toward the sea. "We don't fix it," Ellsworth finally says. "We rebuild it." Porter swallows. Under fire, Ellsworth looks east toward the hedgerows where German artillery still waits, always under fire. What Ellsworth and his men are facing is not improvisation. It is a plan, one written long before a single boot touched French sand. Back in England, Allied planners studied French rail maps until they knew them better than London streets. They knew which lines mattered, which junctions controlled whole regions, which bridges the Germans would destroy first. And they planned for it. Specialized railway engineer battalions were formed. Prefabricated bridges were stockpiled. Track-laying equipment was loaded onto ships alongside tanks and artillery. The idea was simple, brutal in its logic. If the rails could be restored faster than the Germans could stop them, the invasion would keep moving. If not, it would stall. Ellsworth's unit moves in as soon as the infantry pushes the line forward a few hundred yards. The work begins immediately. Men fan out with crowbars and cutting torches, hauling twisted rails aside while others tamp fresh ballast into place. Portable cranes clatter into position, their engines whining as they lift replacement girders scavenged from rail yards in England. German artillery finds them within hours. Shells walk across the embankment, sending dirt and steel screaming through the air. Men dive flat, hugging the ground as fragments whistle overhead. When the barrage lifts, they get up and go back to work. No speeches, no hesitation, just motion. By nightfall, Ellsworth walks the length of newly laid track with a lantern, checking alignment by eye. His boots sink into the mud, but the rails are straight, solid. He stops at the edge of the temporary bridge, a patched-together span of steel and timber that looks fragile against the darkness. Porter joins him, exhaustion etched deep into his face. "You really think it'll hold a locomotive?" Ellsworth taps the beam with his boot. "It'll hold long enough." "Long enough for what?" Ellsworth looks back toward the beaches, where the glow of unloading ships still lights the horizon. Long enough to save the invasion. Far behind them, generals argue over maps. In forward positions, infantry bleeds for hedgerows measured in yards. But here, in the mud, under shell fire, another battle is being fought. One measured not in ground taken, but in tons delivered. And tomorrow morning, if Ellsworth is right, a sound not heard in Normandy since before D-Day will echo across the fields. The sound of a train whistle. June 19th, 1944. Outskirts of Saint-Lô, Normandy. The whistle cuts through the morning mist like something alive. Low, hoarse, almost disbelieving. Men stop what they're doing and look up. Captain Robert Ellsworth stands beside the track as the first locomotive crawls forward, its black engine coated in grime from a lifetime that began long before the war. Steam hisses from valves patched with field repairs. The wheels squeal against newly laid rails, hesitant at first, as if testing whether the ground beneath them is real. Then the engine commits. Steel rolls forward. The line holds. Ellsworth doesn't smile. He just exhales, slow, controlled, and turns back toward his men. "Clear the siding," he says. "We've got 30 more cars behind this one." To the men unloading ammunition crates and fuel drums, the train is just another job. To Allied command, it is a warning shot against catastrophe. For nearly 2 weeks after D-Day, the invasion has been living on borrowed time. Trucks have done what trucks always do, carried impossible loads, broken down under strain, and turned narrow Norman roads into choking arteries of mud and metal. The Germans know it. That's why they blew the rails so carefully. And that's why Ellsworth's work matters more than the men firing rifles a mile away. At a field headquarters near Isigny, Brigadier General Harold Thompson, logistics planner for First Army, studies a map marked with red grease pencil. Every broken rail line is a wound. Every repaired one is a pulse restored. An aide enters. "Sir, first rail shipment reached the Saint-Lô depot this morning." Thompson looks up sharply. "Already?" "Yes, sir. Ammunition and POL." Thompson nods once, then leans back in his chair. That buys us time. He does not say how little time they had left. Back on the line, Ellsworth's men work like ghosts. They sleep in shifts, eat when they can, wash only when rain does the job for them. German artillery probes the rails constantly, firing ranging shots, adjusting, firing again. The Germans understand railroads, too. They aim for junctions, switchyards, bridges. Ellsworth counters by doing something that looks insane on paper. He doesn't fix one line. He fixes many. Short spurs, temporary bypasses, redundant routes, tracks that snake through fields and orchards where rails have no business being. "If they cut one," he tells Porter, shouting over an explosion, "we don't stop. We reroute." One afternoon, a German battery catches them mid-span. The shell lands close enough to flip a rail section end over end. 2 men are wounded. 1 doesn't get up. Ellsworth is on his feet immediately, grabbing a crowbar, hauling steel with the rest. Porter grabs his arm. "Sir, Command wants you back." Ellsworth yanks free. "Command can wait, the track can't." They finish the repair before nightfall. The next train rolls through at dawn. What the Germans don't know, what they can't know, is that this speed is not accidental. In England, months before D-Day, railway engineers trained on mock French lines built to scale. They practiced bridge reconstruction, blindfolded. Timed themselves replacing switches under simulated fire. Learned how to scavenge usable rail from bombed yards and twist it back into alignment with heat and leverage. They were told something simple. You will not have time to be perfect. You will only have time to be fast. By late June, railheads are creeping inland, behind the front lines, sometimes only hours after an area is secured. Ammunition dumps swell. Fuel depots appear where cattle grazed days earlier. Infantry officers notice the difference first. Artillery fires longer barrages. Tank units stop rationing fuel. Attacks that once stalled for lack of shells now push through. No one thanks the engineers. No one has to. One evening, Ellsworth climbs onto the embankment and watches a train pass west to east. Supplies moving forward, wounded moving back. Boxcars rattle. A hospital carriage sways gently, red crosses barely visible in the fading light. Porter stands beside him, hands on his hips. "You ever think about what happens if this fails?" Porter asks. Ellsworth keeps his eyes on the train. Every day. And? Ellsworth finally turns. Then the war stops here. The Germans feel it soon after. Prisoners captured near the Vire River talk about American attacks that don't slow down. Units that pause, then come back stronger. Barrages that last longer than expected. They don't know why. They only know the pressure never lets up. By the end of June, Allied planners quietly acknowledge something critical. The invasion has not stalled. It has stabilized, and that means it can break out. But the real test is still ahead, because in July, the Allies will attempt something far more dangerous than landing on a beach. They will try to tear the front wide open, and every mile they advance will demand more steel, more fuel, more ammunition, delivered faster than ever before. The railroads will either keep up, or everything will collapse. July 10th, 1944. Near the Vire River, Normandy. The ground shakes before the bombs arrive. It's a low, rolling vibration that creeps through the soil, rattles canteens, and makes men glance skyward even before they hear the engines. Then the sound hits. Thousands of aircraft, layered and relentless, droning eastward in waves. Operation Cobra is about to begin. Captain Robert Ellsworth stands beside a rail spur hacked into what used to be a wheat field, watching boxcars being unloaded at a pace that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. Ammunition crates thud onto the ground. Fuel drums roll and are righted by men already soaked in sweat despite the morning cool. Ellsworth checks his watch. Right on time. You don't see the railroads from the cockpit. Pilots flying overhead will remember the explosions, the firestorms, the German lines collapsing under the weight of Allied air power. Infantrymen will remember the noise, the shock, the sudden movement after weeks of grinding stalemate. But none of that happens without what's happening here. Because Operation Cobra will burn through ammunition faster than any battle fought so far in Normandy, and someone has to deliver it. German forces west of Saint-Lô are already brittle. Weeks of constant pressure, bombing, and attrition have worn them thin. But thin is not the same as broken. To break them, the Allies need momentum. Momentum needs fuel, and fuel, in July 1944, moves best on rails. At a railhead outside Carentan, Major Eleanor Hastings, one of the few women serving in senior Allied logistics planning roles, studies a chalkboard covered in numbers. Train arrivals, turnaround times, tonnage moved per hour. An officer beside her mutters, "If Cobra runs longer than planned, we're going to outrun the trucks." Hastings doesn't look up. Then the trains run longer. They'll be in range. They already are. She taps the chalkboard. Keep them moving. German artillery begins targeting the railheads deliberately now. This isn't harassment fire anymore. This is recognition. Shells slam into supply yards. Locomotives are damaged. Crews killed or wounded. Tracks cratered again and again. Ellsworth's teams respond the only way they can. They move at night, lanterns hooded, hammers wrapped in cloth, welding torches shielded from view. Men working by touch and memory, guided by whispered commands. The rails are repaired by dawn, every dawn. On July 18th, the breakout begins. Bombers smash the German front west of Saint-Lô. Infantry surge forward. Tanks pour through gaps that have not existed since June. And behind them, the supply lines stretch, but they do not snap. Train after train pushes inland, bringing forward fuel for armor, shells for artillery, rations for men who are suddenly moving faster than they have since landing. A tank commander radios back, half laughing in disbelief. "We're not stopping. We're not stopping at all." Ellsworth hears about the advance from a runner, breathless and grinning. "They broke through," the man says. "Clean through." Ellsworth nods, already scanning the rails ahead. "How far?" 10 miles. Maybe more." Ellsworth does the math instantly. "Then we're late." The engineers move forward again. They leapfrog railheads, abandoning yesterday's work to start tomorrow's farther east. Bridges are thrown across streams in hours. Switches are rebuilt with salvaged parts. Rail cars are unloaded before they fully stop rolling. Men collapse where they stand when their shift ends, then get up and do it again. German prisoners captured during the retreat begin to say the same thing. "We could not understand it," one officer tells an interrogator. "Your attacks did not pause, even when we believed you must stop." They assumed fuel shortages would slow the tanks. They assumed ammunition would run low. They assumed wrong. By the end of July, Allied forces are no longer fighting for hedgerows. They are racing across open country. Paris is suddenly a possibility, and deep in the rear, in fields that will never appear on a map of great battles, the railroads keep pace. Steel against time, again. Ellsworth watches a locomotive disappear eastward into the dust, its whistle fading into the distance. He hasn't slept properly in days. His hands shake when he finally lets them rest. Porter stands beside him, voice low. "Sir, we did it." Ellsworth doesn't answer right away, because he knows something Porter doesn't. This plan didn't just save the invasion. It changed the tempo of the war. And now the Allies are moving too fast for Germany to recover. The rails have done their job, but the cost, in men, in exhaustion, in risk, is far from over. Because once an army breaks out, it must be fed relentlessly. August 3rd, 1944, near Avranches, France. The tracks don't end at the breakout. They multiply. Captain Robert Ellsworth stands on a low rise, overlooking what used to be a quiet French rail junction. Now it is alive. Locomotives hissing, boxcars slamming shut, cranes swinging loads of ammunition and fuel with mechanical precision. Dust hangs thick in the hot August air, mixing with coal smoke and sweat. This is no longer a rescue operation. It is an avalanche. The Allied advance has blown past every conservative estimate. Armored columns are driving day and night. Infantry rides on tank decks. Boots dangling. Eyes fixed forward. German resistance is no longer a wall. It is a series of fragments, collapsing as quickly as contact is made. And every mile gained increases the appetite. Fuel consumption triples. Ammunition expenditure explodes. Spare parts vanish faster than they can be inventoried. The railroad plan that saved Normandy now faces its most dangerous test. Success. Ellsworth flips through a dog-eared notebook. pencil marks smudged from sweat. Railheads must move forward every 48 hours. Miss one window and the trucks will choke. Miss two and the advance stalls. There is no slack left in the system. German air reconnaissance, though weakened, still probes the rail lines. Fighter bombers slip through gaps in Allied air cover, strafing yards, locomotives, bridges. One afternoon, a rail yard near Avranches takes a direct hit. A locomotive burns, ammunition detonates, steel screams as boxcars are ripped open. Ellsworth arrives minutes later, stepping over wreckage, shouting orders. Bypass the yard. Spur line to the south. Move the railhead now. An officer protests. Sir, the maps. Ellsworth cuts him off. The maps are wrong. The rail-all aren't. They lay track across open pasture that night. By morning, trains are rolling again. German prisoners now speak openly of confusion. They expected the Allies to pause at the Seine. They expected fuel shortages. They expected time. Instead, American and British units appear where no supply line should exist. One captured German major shakes his head. You moved like an army that never needed to breathe. Ellsworth hears this second-hand and says nothing. He knows better. The army breathes constantly. It just breathes through steel. By mid-August, Paris is liberated. The railroads, shattered by bombing months earlier, are already being stitched back together behind the advance. French railway workers join Allied engineers, pointing out hidden sidings, intact tunnels, routes the Germans missed. Coal-fired engines roll again through stations that had been silent for years. Civilians watch from platforms, stunned, as supply trains thunder past, carrying the weight of liberation deeper into Europe. Ellsworth finally collapses one night beside a rail embankment, helmet pulled over his eyes. Porter finds him there at dawn. Sir, he says gently, command's asking for a status report. Ellsworth sits up slowly, joints aching. Tell them, he says, voice rough. The rails are holding. Porter hesitates. And us? Ellsworth looks at the tracks disappearing east. We're holding too. But the truth is harsher. Men are worn thin. Accidents increase. Judgment slips. The same exhaustion that destroyed German command structures now stalks the engineers. And Ellsworth knows it. He has seen this before. In planning rooms, in case studies, in warnings ignored. An army can outpace its logistics, and logistics can outpace the men who run them. Late one evening, a young engineer collapses while tightening a rail joint. Heat stroke. Dehydration. He is carried away without ceremony. Work resumes immediately. The train schedule does not pause. Ellsworth writes a brief note in his log that night. Rail capacity adequate. Personnel strained. He underlines the second sentence twice. Because somewhere ahead, beyond Paris, beyond the Seine, beyond the maps they studied in England, another reality is forming. Germany is not finished yet, and the railroads will have to carry this army all the way to the Rhine, or break trying. Ellsworth walks the tracks one last time before dawn, listening to the distant rumble of another train approaching. Steel on steel, the sound of momentum, the sound of a war that can no longer slow down, even if it wanted to. September 1st, 1944, near Reims, France. The rails hum long before the train appears. It's a low vibration you feel through the soles of your boots, a distant tremor that carries through the ballast and into your bones. Captain Robert Ellsworth pauses beside the track, eyes half closed, listening. Then the locomotive bursts into view, black, scarred, patched with plates welded in the field, hauling a string of boxcars that seem to stretch all the way back to Normandy. They don't slow. They can't. The war has outrun every original timetable. What was supposed to be a measured advance has turned into a pursuit. German units fall back faster than intelligence can track them. Maps are outdated almost as soon as they're printed. Supply requests arrive stamped urgent, then critical, then immediate. Ellsworth reads them all, and he knows the truth they won't write down. If the rails fail now, the advance dies in place. At Supreme Headquarters, planners are alarmed. The front is hundreds of miles from the beaches. Ports are damaged or unusable. Trucks, thousands of them, are pushed beyond design limits in desperate stop-gap measures like the Red Ball Express. But even that famous convoy system is bleeding itself dry. Fuel to move fuel, rubber wearing away, drivers collapsing at the wheel. Railroads were never meant to be optional. They were meant to be decisive. Near Reims, German saboteurs strike at night. Explosives tear through a junction just hours before a scheduled fuel run. A bridge is damaged. Signals destroyed. A derailment blocks the line. Ellsworth arrives before sunrise. He surveys the wreckage silently. "How long?" Porter asks. Ellsworth checks the angle of the rails, the twisted coupler, the scorched timbers. 12 hours. Porter exhales in relief. Ellsworth doesn't. 12 hours we don't have. They do it in 6. Men work without speaking. Faces grey with exhaustion. Hands moving by instinct. Floodlights glare against the darkness. Sparks fly. Sweat cuts channels through grime. A locomotive idles on the far side of the break. Steam building. Waiting like a living thing straining at a leash. When the final spike is driven, Ellsworth doesn't order a test run. He waves the train through. The bridge holds. The rails scream. The supplies roll east. Captured German officers now talk openly of inevitability. "You were faster than our destruction," one says during interrogation. "Even when we broke the lines, you rebuilt them before the consequences arrived." They assumed delay would equal victory. They underestimated repair. They misunderstood logistics. Ellsworth receives word days later that Allied spearheads have reached the German border. Men cheer, then immediately ask for more fuel, more ammunition, more rails. But Ellsworth finally notices something different. Orders from above change tone. Not faster, smarter. Rotations begin. Railway units are relieved in shifts. Fresh engineers arrive. Trained replacements taking over from men who haven't slept properly in weeks. Ellsworth is ordered back. Not home, but off the line. He argues. Briefly. Loses. On his last night near the tracks, Ellsworth sits on a crate, listening to trains pass, one after another. Porter joins him. "They say the invasion almost stalled," Porter says quietly, "that this plan saved it." Ellsworth stares at the rails glowing faintly in the moonlight. "No," he says, "it prevented something worse." "What's that?" Ellsworth thinks for a long moment. The moment when an army stops moving and doesn't know why. Years later, historians will write about tanks, bombers, and generals. They will map arrows across France in thick blue lines. They will call it a breakout. They will call it inevitable. But inevitability has a sound. Steel on steel. And in the summer of 1944, that sound never stopped. October 10th, 1944. Somewhere east of the Moselle River. Autumn settles over France in muted colors. Fields stripped bare. Trees thinning. Mornings sharp with frost. The front has moved far beyond Normandy now, but the rails still tell the story of how it all held together. Captain Robert Ellsworth walks slowly along a siding at first light, hands clasped behind his back, listening. The war still makes noise. Artillery rumbles. Engines drone. Somewhere, men are fighting, but beneath it all is another sound. Steel on steel. Constant. Unbroken. The railroad plan has become routine, and that, Ellsworth knows, is its greatest victory. Trains arrive when expected. Railheads shift forward without drama. Supply officers argue over schedules instead of shortages. Infantry divisions advance, pause, refit, then move again. Not because they are desperate, but because they are ready. The system breathes. That was always the goal. Ellsworth is no longer at the sharpest edge. Younger engineers now handle the emergency repairs, the night work, the frantic improvisation. He advises, inspects, corrects when necessary, and watches. He watches trains pass through towns that once stood silent under occupation. French civilians wave as locomotives thunder by, carrying fuel, ammunition, and food toward a war that is steadily moving away from them. The rails have become something else now, not just supply lines, arteries. At a forward headquarters, an intelligence briefing mentions something almost in passing. German counterattacks are becoming sporadic, poorly supplied, quickly exhausted. A colonel taps the map. They can't sustain operations anymore. No one mentions railroads. No one needs to. Ellsworth receives a letter one evening, forwarded from England, delayed by months. Inside is a carbon copy of a planning memo he helped write before D-Day. One line is underlined in red pencil. Rail repair capacity will determine operational tempo inland. Ellsworth folds the paper carefully and slips it back into the envelope. They had been right, and they had almost been too late. In December, as winter closes in and the Germans launch their final gamble in the Ardennes, the rail system bends, but does not break. Lines are damaged, bridges destroyed. They are repaired. Again. Years later, long after the uniforms are gone, Ellsworth will try to explain it to a classroom of young officers. He won't talk about heroics. He'll talk about time, about how modern war is not decided in moments of glory, but in whether an army can move, pause, recover, and move again without collapsing under its own weight. He'll tell them this. The Normandy invasion didn't survive because we were brave. It survived because we were prepared to fix what we knew would be broken. The guns will eventually fall silent. The maps will be redrawn. But the rail lines, many of them rebuilt under fire in the summer of 1944, will remain in service long after the war ends. Farmers will ship crops on them. Children will ride them to school. They will look ordinary. No one will remember the nights when men worked by lantern light, counting minutes instead of hours, racing not the enemy, but starvation, delay, and collapse. Ellsworth stands beside the track as one last train passes into the distance, its whistle fading across the cold air. He listens until the sound disappears. Then he turns away. The invasion did not stall. Because somewhere in Normandy, when everything depended on it, the rails were put back together faster than they could be destroyed. And that, more than any single battle, carried the war forward.